shakes hands, and off we go. 1 d4 by Dennis, d5 by Magnus, and puts his pieces on the squares where he wants them to be properly and presses the clock. c4 here, Queen's Gambit on the board, and we have the Slav defense. Dennis thinks for a bit and takes on d5, the exchange Slav. Now this is kind of an interesting decision because Magnus is known for his positional play. To play the exchange Slav means you're taking it into positional chess theory. e3 played, and Magnus plays a6, a useful move taking into control. The b5 square, rook c1 played, and now the bishop comes out. You want to play e6 later on, so the bishop is outside the pawn chain. Knight to f3, and now pawn to e6. The queen comes in and attacks this soft pawn. If you play b5, I already have knight takes b5 attacking here. So Magnus goes for this very slightly uncomfortable move, rook a7, but also quite thematic in the Slav. Bishop e7 played, and Dennis quickly castles. Black also can castle here. White would claim a small edge, but Magnus is in a fighting mood. He goes knight d7. Dennis plays his knight to a4, maybe looking at the c5 square there, but g5 attacking the bishop. The bishop now has to move. Bishop comes into e5. The rook is attacked here. Well, you must take the bishop. It's an important piece to be taken. Knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, pawn takes, and b5. And I would say the position is great, but Magnus castles here. Interesting decision there by Magnus. He's like, I want to let your bishop be here. The bishop comes back to g3, and now h5, trying to trap the bishop with h4. Dennis plays the calm move h3. If h4, you just drop your bishop back, but Magnus is going even further on the offensive. g4, pawn takes, and now is this pawn a strength or a weakness? Because it gives black so much space on the king side. King g7, rook h8, but the g4 pawn is attacked. Magnus defends it for now. There are two attackers, two defenders. Dennis brings in the third attacker here on the g4 square. The knight jumps in, attacking the bishop on g3. And I guess Dennis does not want his pawn structure to be ruined, so he plays his bishop up to f4. What to do about the g4 pawn? It's still so soft. Bishop g5 played here by Magnus, and Dennis says, thank you so much, Magnus, for this free pawn. Bishop takes bishop, pawn takes, and now you can see that white is not only a pawn up, the black rook is also weirdly positioned on a7, but Magnus says, I have a trump card here, and the trump card is the open h file, and I'm going to make use of it. Dennis takes on f5, e takes f5, and now rook h8, queen f6, queen h6. These are the ideas in the position. g3, I like this move. Rook h8 played here by Magnus. Is he going to create a lot of play? Dennis brings his knight to f3, just improving the position. And Magnus first improves the rook. Maybe it will double down the h file to attack. King g2, I love how calmly Dennis is building up his position. Queen to f6. Queen h6 could be an idea, but white already has rook h1. Knight comes to c3, attacking the pawn on d5. Plays rook to d8. Not a move that Magnus would like to play happily, but he has to. And now queen to d3 played. If queen h6 is played here, you have rook h1. So he plays rook h5. Rook comes to h1, and now queen h6. Look at the trap that Magnus has set. If you take, and rook h1, I simply take and fork you. This is not something that's great. So queen e3 played here and tripling down the h file. Wow, Dennis has to remain careful. He takes here. Queen takes, threatening checkmate. Queen h3, queen h1, but the knight blocks the h file. Knight h4, looking at the weakened pawn here. And now knight goes back to f6. And Dennis brings his rook to h1. Slowly and steadily, he is putting on pressure on Magnus. And what I love is he's not getting intimidated by Magnus Carlsen. He's also keeping a very good time on the clock. King f8 played by Magnus here, removing the king. But there could be some knight g6 check threats which Magnus could have missed. Is it coming in here? Well, Dennis first places queen to d3, attacking the pawn on f5. Now the knight goes back to e7. And there's still a chance for this tactic of knight g6. Knight to e7 and knight g6 played. You can see Magnus Carlsen is so unhappy there. He has missed this. F takes g6, rook takes h5, takes it now. He's material down as well in the position, apart from being positionally worse. And Dennis, let's see if he manages to convert. Best of players have faltered against Magnus. King f7. Magnus always keeps a lead on the clock. He wants to play quickly. Knight g1, bringing the knight from f3 to h4 is his plan. Magnus quickly pushes his pawn to h4, trying to break the position. He takes it. Doesn't want to let the pawn come any further. Now Magnus chops off the pawn on h4, attacking here on the f4 square. But Dennis calmly plays his knight to h3. I love the calm and the poise with which this boy is playing. It doesn't feel like he's playing the world number one. It just feels like he knows his position is better and he's just going to grind it out. That's the confidence that you want in your life. Knight c6 played. Now attacking the pawn on d4. Dennis chops off the pawn. Magnus takes the pawn. Dennis takes another pawn, getting two passers on the queen side. And now Magnus gives a check. King comes to f1. Rook goes back to h4. You can see Magnus is sort of shifty in his check. Queen d3 defending. Knight goes back. And now looking at this pawn, which is slightly weakened. But does that matter? Well, Dennis goes for a check. Rook g4 comes to e3. And Magnus now has to decide what to do. His knight is hanging here. He goes rook h4, attacking the knight. If you take here, he wants to take on h3. Dennis says, I'll take it anyway. Rook takes h3. And maybe it's time for the a pawn to start rolling down the board. But first, Dennis brings his king up. Rook h1. And a4 played. Magnus brings the rook behind the pawn. Queen comes to c6. The queen is just too strong in this position. You can just put your queen here on b5 exactly, defending everything, threatening a5, a6. And guys, this is over. Denis Lazovic has completely outplayed the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen, and he resigns. The 18-year-old strikes. What a win here for the youngster. Clearly, this is a name you have to get used to. Denis Lazovic, 2006 born. Also the same year that we have the world champion from Gukesh. This is the age of the youngsters now.